Academy and the first Caribbean Authorpreneur Summit around her book, Authorpreneur Secrets. Write fast, publish affordably, and generate lasting income. As an Amazon best-selling author of 21 books, she has coached several Caribbean authors to become Amazon best-selling authors. Her mission is to raise up 10,000 winning Caribbean entrepreneurs by 2030, to ensure fewer books die in the minds of their authors, that more manuscripts become published legacies, and precious lives are transformed with the turn of every page.
It's Transformation Thursday and time for another Authorpreneur Secrets Live Masterclass. We are in week 3 of our 15-week series, Beyond the Book Launch, how to keep your book alive or selling beyond the book launch. And we're sharing 15 secrets to do that. And today we're going to be talking about podcasts. Did you know that podcasts sell books? There are so many books that I have bought as a result of listening to a podcast. And in recent times, you have these video podcasts, and that has continued. So if you are an author and you sold your first 1,000 books or 500 books or 200 books after the book launch, and you're wondering what to do to keep your book selling, consider podcast. Class is now in session, so let's break that down. If you're joining for the first time, my name is C. Ruth Taylor. I am the founder of the Authorpreneur Secret Academy, and this masterclass is based on the book Authorpreneur Secrets, Write Fast, Publish Cost Effectively, and Generate Lasting Income. It's all about teaching you how to make a living with your book. Not many authors do that. And so we want to show you how to do that. In fact, some of the 15 ways that we are sharing in terms of to keep the book alive are actually things that you can do to make a living with your book. So we are, what they call it, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. All right, so let's get into podcasting. As usual, I have some statistics for you. So I am going to share that just now, because this is an area that if you tap into it, it will indeed help you to sell more books and keep the book alive beyond the book launch. So according to eMarketer, and I'm on this website called backlinkco.com, it is estimated in the US that there are over, podcasting started in the US, and there are over 546 million podcast listeners worldwide. And you want to tap into that market. For most of us in the Caribbean, if we're able to tap into the diaspora market to sell our books, that is great. And most of us publish on Amazon and other places. So in the US, it is estimated that there are over 135 million consumers of podcasts. And this is a 2024 statistics, right? So there are in 2023, there were 506.9 million podcast listeners worldwide. In 2024, 546.7 million podcast listeners worldwide. It is estimated that by 2027, there will be 651.7 million podcast listeners worldwide. Now, wouldn't you want to tap into that listenership? Because as I said, podcasts sell books. There are so many books that I have bought as a result of listening to podcasts. One of the ones that I bought recently was Boss Moves by Myron Golden. And it was as a result of listening to him speak on a podcast. It was a video podcast on YouTube. Now, in terms of where you have most of the listenership in terms of the podcasting, 47% of the US population listen to 12 plus podcasts at least once a month. Worldwide podcast ad spending is estimated to hit 4.2 billion US dollars. Video podcasts are on the rise, with as many as 33% of listeners opting for watchable podcasts. So YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, they lead the pack for global podcast dominance. And so in my interview, if you listen to my own podcast, which I started in May 2021, in my interview this week with Delaney Diamond, she shared that one of the ways she is making a living with her writing is that she leverages other people's audience. So if you want to go beyond the book launch, because most times the book launch is just your family and friends get together, and that's an event, which was the first secret that was shared, right? Events, course, and this week is podcasting. What podcasting does is that it allows you to get in front of other people's audiences. And so one of the things is that as you write your book, you have to think about the audience. Many times in working with authors, and I ask, who is your audience? Who is your book for? The author will say, my book is for everybody. No, if your book is for everybody, it makes it difficult to market. Sure, you want everybody to read your book, but the truth is not everybody is interested in the topic that you wrote about. Your friends or family may patronize you and sometimes they buy the book and put it down. So when you are writing your book, one of the things I say is that you need a map. You need your message, your audience, right? And you need your purpose for that. And so we're looking at platforms. So a podcast is a great way to tap into other people's audiences, to expand the reach of your message and to make more people aware of your book. But you don't want to just go on any podcast, right? You want to target specific podcasts. And this is why knowing who your primary target audience is, this is when that comes into play. Because if your book is about, let me just use Authorpreneur Secrets. My audience for that is authors, and primarily independent authors. So it makes no sense for me to go on a podcast talking about family life, talking about friendship, talking about romance and other things. When Authorpreneur Secrets, that book, is targeting aspiring authors, aspiring publishers, those who want to know, and self-publishers, those who want to know how to publish a book, how to generate lasting income. So I would want to find podcasts that talk about that. So the first thing I would want to do is to find podcasts that target their audience focuses on authors. So like going on a podcast like Joanna Penn's podcast, the Creative Pen podcast, would help me. Going on the indie podcast or Matty Dalrymple's podcast or the podcast for the Alliance of Independent Authors, their self-advised podcast would be in my best interest because we now have audience alignment. And so you want to have audience alignment. So if you're going to consider podcasting, you need to know who your audience is. So you can go on podcasts. I remember when John Lee Dumas was releasing one of his books, he is a world-leading podcaster but to sell his book, and he had gotten a trad deal. Because sometimes we think that if you're a traditional author, if you get a trad deal, that you don't have to do all of this marketing thing. He booked himself on 350 different podcasts, and that helped to move the needle to sell his books. And so you want to zoom in on your audience. If you're not so sure who your audience is, look at the topic that you're writing about, and you can say, who would be interested in this topic? What are the issues that are in my book? So let me just pick another book. Dr. Clara Ricketts, her book, Yes, They Can. It talks about how to deal with children with learning and behavior disorders. So she could go on an education podcast. She could go on a podcast that focuses on learning and behavior disorders or disability, podcasts that focus on diversity, or my friend Raquel, whose book is The Albino Marketer, How to Find Success Online. So any podcast that talks about working online, any podcast that addresses albinism, the challenges of living with that, she could target them and go on them. So the question is, if I'm going to go on, so you're saying, yes, Ruth, you talk about going on other people's platforms and using podcasts as a way to extend the life of your book and to sell more book beyond the book launch. Good. But how do I find these podcasts? Well, I have the answer for you. And so we have a marketing course that I have created along with 3 other authors who are also good at marketing, Book Marketing Secrets 101. And within that course, you can go to the Authorpreneur Secrets Academy page, authorpreneursecrets.com/academy, and you see the list of courses. And this one is just $99, right? Within it, we have a video tutorial by Marva Titley Smith of Matrix Sparks. And when she launched her book, she was going on a number of different podcasts and she was successful. So I asked her as a digital marketer to do a presentation on this. And so this slide here is taken from her presentation and part of the toolkit that you will get when you do that course. So where to find connections, friends of friends. So if you have friends who have been on certain podcasts, or you can ask them to recommend podcasts for you. You can get podcast suggestions from Facebook groups for your niche. And 3, you can actually use paid services like Podmatch and others to help to book the right podcast for you. But again, you need to know who your audience is. You can't just book yourself on a podcast. Before going on a podcast you actually need to do some research about that podcast, listen to a couple of episodes so you know how you're going to contribute to that person's audience. Most times you're not paying to go on a podcast. It is free marketing and promotion, but you want to add value to that person's podcast. So if you're going to do podcasts, go on other people's podcasts. Also ensure that you prepare. You have your media kit, or at least you have your author bio ready. You have a professional picture ready. You have your book, an image of your book ready. You are already on social media, or you have some way for persons to contact you. Also, I found four other websites that can help you to identify podcasts for which you can be a guest. So let me bring that up as well. And you can just simply Google this information and you will also find the information. So I've done some of the work for you. So here are 4 websites for finding podcast guests. Remember, I said if you're going to go on people's podcasts, you need to listen to them, a couple episodes, know what they're about, have the message of your book ready, an image, because they're going to need that to promote the episode. You need to know what's the theme and the focus of your book so that you can explain yourself. So websites for finding podcast guests are like podcastguests.com. This is a member-based website that is all about connecting podcasts with experts, authors, and podcasters to be guests on their podcast. And remember, a book opens doors. So once you have a book, it's an easier way for you to get on a podcast, which is another media tool to get in front of other people's audiences. So a book gives you authority and a book opens doors. So you can do that. Podmatch was mentioned before. You also have Perfect Podcast Guests. That is another online directory and site that can help you to find the right podcast. And number 4 is Matchmaker. You can visit their website and they will help you. So that's a community that has 25,000 people at the time of this research, which is this year. So you can go there and find a match. In order to find a match, remember, as I said, that you have to know who your audience is so that you can connect. It's not just getting on any podcast. It has to match what you've written about. No, that's one option. So you go in front of other people's audiences, you get on podcasts, and you can hire somebody, a VA, to find the right podcast for you, but make sure you are prepared in terms of pitching, that you listen to these people's podcasts and you're going there to add value. All right. The other thing is that you can create your own podcast. Turn your book into a podcast, which is what I did with my book, Authorpreneur Secrets, right? And so we started the Authorpreneur Secrets podcast based on the book, Authorpreneur Secrets, and I'm sharing from it, and then I expand it, right? So there would be a mention of my book on the podcast and an instant connection. So podcasts are good for marketing. You don't have to turn your book into a podcast and do that forever. At first, when I was learning podcasting, I thought, okay, if I'm not going to be in this for the long haul, I don't want to be podcasting. But then I learned that one of the marketing strategies that some authors are using and some publishers are using is that they will have like just a podcast just for the book to discuss the topics of the book, and they do that maybe like for 6 or 12 episodes, and that's it. It's a deep dive into the book, discussing the topics of the book. You can invite other guests on it, and so that is like a packaged information delivered in a podcast format, and it is just related to the book for a season, and that's it. So you don't have to do like mine, where my podcast is weekly, and I started taking breaks with it, and it may become like a seasonal podcast. It doesn't have to be that. You can just have a podcast that is all about your book and the topics in your book, and you could do that as after your launch as phase 2, again, extending the life of the book beyond the book launch. And you can just do one season of that. It can be audio. And so you can do these pre-recorded things, release it, and it's an excellent marketing strategy. And that's it. So I trust that this way of extending the life of your book beyond the book launch, that you will get into it. If you would like to start a podcast, whether it is just for a season or it is something that you want to do long-term to market and sell books or to connect with folks, get your message to the masses, then I want to encourage you, as this is very Caribbean-centric, right, to connect with Heneka Watkis Porter of the Entrepreneurial You podcast and business. She was my podcast coach. She is I would call her the Caribbean podcast queen, award-winning. She has free material on how to start a podcast, and she also will train you to start a podcast. You can also have somebody do the podcast for you. So she hosts podcasts, for example, for JPS and I think it's the Jamaica Stock Exchange, as well as she has her own podcast. So that's something else. You don't have to do everything. Somebody could build a podcast for you and you put it as a marketing strategy and you just do a season and that's it, or go on other people's podcasts. So just go to henekawatkisporter.com or look for the Entrepreneurial You podcast, and I will put a link to that in the description, how you can get in touch with her to start your podcast journey. She has had amazing podcast guests like Les Brown, Lisa Nichols, Richard Branson, all the you name it. And you may be wondering, how does she find these guests? Because there are sites that you can join, like Podmatch, and the rest that I shared that will help you to find amazing guests. And podcast hosts are always looking for people to come on. And as an author, you have a key, a master key to enter through that door. And now all you need to do is put a plan together. How many podcasts do you want to go on for the year? So this can become a major part of your marketing strategy long term. So every year say, okay, each month I'm going to do one, or each quarter. That will extend the life of your book and get the book selling. And even beyond just selling the book, that can help you to get your message to the masses, one, but it can open more doors, which will lead to secret number 4 for next week, which is speaking. And so tune in, join me next week as we talk about another secret to keep your book alive in this 15-week series. I trust that you found this insightful and you are going to take actionable steps. If you are considering starting a podcast, maybe long-term or just for your book, or you want to get on other people's podcasts, let me know in the comments and share this with other authors. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Let's continue to spread the word of winning beyond book sales and helping to change lives, build legacy, and create financial freedom for authors beyond book sales. This is Ruth Taylor saying, ta for now, until next time.